Mildred Agnes Lambert I was. I'm now Mildred Agnes Goldsmith, and I was born on the 16th of January 1921. The happiest moment of my life was starting school and having to walk the 5 miles to the Park State School and meet other children. It was just a lovely, lovely start to my life, I thought. I had many other happy moments, of course, when I wakened to find Mother and Dad had given me a horse to ride when I was maybe 3. The most important moment in my life was my marriage to Desmond Henty Goldsmith, and that was in 1943 in St John's Cathedral in Brisbane. He had returned from 2 years overseas, and well, there was doubt whether he'd return, of course, so that was a lovely moment. It was a big surprise one day when I was travelling to the Queensland Book Depot, where I worked each day, and I looked down, and there was my husband-to-be in a taxi going out to where I lived, and I hadn't seen him for 2 years and 3 months, I think, and didn't know he was on. It was all secret during wartime. So that was a very happy moment. I was born in the Bosbrook private hospital in John Street, Berryborough, where the Parkway Motel now stands. And my father and mother had come in by sulky from the 5 Mile on a stormy night, I believe, and a Dr. Farmer delivered us because we were twins, and that was also a shock to everyone. And the doctor was a very much qualified surgeon from England, and his approach to women was not very kind. He said, well, there's no hope for that little one, Daphne Alma, no hope at all. But I don't think much of the other one either. But Mildred Agnes survived till she's 96. The twin survived only because my grandparents were friendly with a lady called Mrs. Gardner, who must have been a trained nurse of some kind. So I was fed, I think, on spirits, and yes, so I believe, and I survived, but staying in Maryborough, not going home. So that it was an interesting beginning for me, but sad because I lost my little sister, and mother didn't have any more children, so naturally I was a spoiled child. My parents were absolutely wonderful. Their photo is up there on the wall, and if any two people could have been in love, they certainly were. When Mother and Dad played tennis, we always Mildred Goldsmith wasn't born with a silver spoon in her mouth. She was born with a tennis court in her backyard. My father and mother were just absolutely absorbed in tennis. So, of course, I loved to meet all the tennis people, and every weekend there was tennis at Melrose, which our property was called in those days. I think now it might be called Mountain View. And when Dad probably decided that my education would be better in Maryborough, I wept buckets because I hated leaving the Park State School, and I just loved it because the the teacher was a Miss Young, and she'd say, pick up your books and chattels, right turn, quick march up to school. And mixing with those children was absolutely lovely. My father was employed by Walkers Limited, and he was a boiler maker, and first of all, and then the first electric welder in Maryborough. And he was really a very clever man, dedicated to tennis, of course, but a perfectionist at Walkers, and so he worked well. I think in those days he worked the Saturday morning as well, but the moment he got home, it would be off with with the tennis clothes, because they played all around the district, you know, Bopple and Monto. They travelled, and not my mother, but my father did. And as it turned out, my uncle, who married one of my mother's sisters, strung rackets, so that was very handy too. But the amazing thing about my father, that he was a wonderful sportsman. He played everything, but he won a gold medal in 1916 for riding a motorcycle 100 miles. He was the champion of that big ride. One of his great friends was an Ernie Hetherington, and he came second. So that must have been a hard thing. But anyway, I inherited the gold medal, which has now been given to Rob's and Mary's son, David, in Brisbane, because he was also a lover of tennis. So that, I feel, Dad would have been so happy to know it was valued and in safe hands. But the remarkable thing about my father, he was the son of William Lambert, who had come out with his father and all the printing gear, and set up a business in Wharf Street. A printing business which lasted 100 years under other family. When my grandfather, who was the eldest, worked all those years, suddenly there was a very young baby, And so when the senior, when his father died, the mother changed the will and left the business to Theo, the younger brother. So poor William was left, and he wasn't very happy about that. He was a wonderful sportsman. I've seen the cups that he won in the military long ago. So he was a very wonderful sportsman, but he decided that he wasn't going to work anymore under his baby brother, so he left and went to look after the lighthouses on Sandy Cape, or the lighthouse on Sandy Cape. And so my father used to go down, ride down the bay, go over by ship, little ship with his friend, and he would drop him and his bike on Fraser Island, and Dad would ride up to the lighthouse and spend the weekend wonderfully with his mother and 3 younger children, I think, because there were 8 in Dad's family. My mother was the eldest of 8 children, and my tears yesterday came when I thought of her walking from the 4 Mile to the Tanana school each school day and back home again. Then she had to take the cows down, or collect the cows, but go down to the corner of the Park State School. There's this little 5-year-old, and the grandmother Jorgensen. She was very beautiful and wore a little lavender bonnet, but Mother never forgot. She was so lovely, and she always had dear little sandwiches cut up for Mother. And but what a long day for a little girl. And then, of course, being the eldest, she'd have to help with the cooking and the washing up and the everything. And so Mother's life was really a wonderful and a story in itself. When Dad was in the hospital he was there a long time, she went every single day with drink or ice cream she'd get over at the shop. And such devotion, I mean, every day. I would just say, I've never seen such affection, and it does me good. My eldest, Rob's daughter, had it rephotographed and put on the wall, and it was their wedding day, and they were married at home, and Mother's cousin was her bridesmaid, and Dad's brother was his best man. But that was a studio photo, and they were very rare in those days. Grandfather had her ride her bike into town to learn not dressmaking, tailoring. So then she could make everything for the 8 children, pants, and so she was my attempts at sewing, she'd say, "Oh, give it to me." So of course I grew up helpless well, fortunately, there's my daughter Mary. She bypassed me, and mother thought she walked on heavenly soil. She just loved her. I first met my husband in a classroom. We first of all were separate, the girls at the central school, and then we were amalgamated, don't ask me, and so that was a great day. We loved having boys in the class, of course, and Des was a handsome boy, and I thought, oh dear, he's a lovely fellow, but he had other friends too. He'd meet, but I was standing, and eventually he told one of the girls that he was very keen on me, and Mildred was his girl, even though he went to the dances and everything, but I was his girl. So that's how that happened. And we used to ride this job at Stew Parts that began so prematurely for me. He was still going to the high school, and he passed his junior, and he had work in the Union Bank that started at probably 8:45, but I had to be at Stew Parts by 8:30. So I would ride to the corner of Lennox and North and wait for Des. He had birds to feed, and he was always late. Anyway, this meeting on the corner of courses were not Burnie, but one of the courses on the corner of Lennox and North. And so that was our meeting ground each weekday, which I loved too. So I used to have to dash in and down the lane and up little steps and sign this tremendous clock, which is still in Jeremy Lowe bought it, and it's still, you press it, and of course, you had to be there at 8:30, and I'd arrive puffing and panting, but they were lovely days, and we met every day. After I saw Des in the taxi in Brisbane, he of course was stationed in Brisbane, but we were married, I think I told you about in St John's Cathedral, and then he was sent to New Guinea for a year, and when he came back, we came back to Berrybrough and lived in a rented home in Tooley Street, and my first baby was born in the old the John Street hospital, and you had to walk up lots and lots of steps. Anyway, but first of all, with my husband had to ride his bike round to Lennox Street to get the car to take me to it's now St Stephen's, it was something else, and it had a long walk up. Anyway, Richard was finally born there, and Richard Arthur, he was strong and healthy, and I was I was very poor in nourishing them, and they survived. Then my second baby was also born in the same hospital, but a very quick birth. Des had to ride again to get the car to take me, and John was nearly coming in Walker Street, and Des was terribly nervous, and so was I. But anyway, I managed to get up the steps, and it was a very, very quick birth. And that boy was a joy to all of us. He seemed to take life with ease, shall we say, and ease everyone else around him. And then a couple of years later, I had a baby. I thought it was coming, and then it wasn't, and that sort of, you know, jolly nuisance one. And eventually, she went up to the. I went up to the Musgrave, yes, and Mary was born in there, and after a lot of effort, and John Isles, our doctor, he said she doesn't even want to know what it is. Well, I was too exhausted anyway, and so Mary Catherine came. Catherine after my Irish, English great-grandmother on the Lambert side. So Mary Catherine came to brighten our lives. And the joy of my mother and father still remains in my memory, because we built a house on Dad's property. It was on the corner of Tullian Garden. Well, we managed to buy a strip from Mr. Robbins next door. So therefore, our house faced Tooley Street and next door to my mother and father, which was very, very handy for me. And of course Mary popping in over there whenever I went out to have special morning tea, and wonderful cook my mother was, puffaloons and all sorts of wonderful things that I couldn't make, and she remembers them to this day. And of course that she was the joy of their lives, every moment till the dying day. John was named John Henty because of the Goldsmiths coming from the Henty's landing in Portland in, I think, 13 or 14, or whenever they were a famous name in Victoria and in years ago. So John had the family name of Henty, Henty, and he was very, very much into history too. So he, you know, it's the right one to be named that, though all the rest were too later. So it was sad when we lost him. But and then Richard went on to marry a few times, 3 times, and produced grandchildren that I'm very fond of. But of course I'm closer to and see Rob and Mary's children, because they well, they grew up around me, and Richard's children were either in Darwin or in the Philippines, so that's a harder, you know, a harder closeness, shall we say, to my husband worked, I don't know when he joined, but very early in the legacy, and that was, at one time he had about 20 war widows he visited, and he wasn't, he was very dedicated to legacy and visiting them, and you know, some of them were my friends, and they were so grateful for the things that he did for them, because children had to be educated, and every year they were given biscuits. Well, the biscuits used to flow all over a big dining room table. And of course they walked miles down Point Vernon in those days. We had a house and still have a house at Point Vernon, so they'd leave the biscuits there and they'd walk, you know, all the way around, and in Maryborough. And it was a matter of fighting off dogs. But those boys were dedicated to helping the widowers of the one. They were so so concerned that their children would get the best there was. And it's different now, of course, a different feeling, but in those days, and of course we went to legacy conferences over in Perth and New Zealand and Darwin, and they were all very well, very serious and very helpful to each other. Ikebana is Japanese floral art, but it really is art. But how I came to be interested, I read a book. It was probably one of those monthly things, and it had Norman Spanen's having been in the war and staying in Japan for probably 16 years or 12 years or something, and learning to do sugetsu and ikenobo. And now ikenobo is 500 years old, and sugetsu is celebrating 90. But I was so interested in the, I've always loved flowers, but Mother always had them. One day I came home from school and I said, "Where's Mum?" And my father said, look at the end of the hose." So there she was. But my bridesmaid, or matron of honour, Del Price, knew someone in Brisbane who went to Bread House to learn. So I found the address, wrote to Sydney, and asked when he was coming again. So I fortunately my son had a flat on Wickham Terrace, and he was coming. He first of all went up to Toowoomba, then down to Brisbane, and he taught in Brisbane at Bread House, which was just round the corner from John's apartment. So I took next time he was coming to Brisbane, I went by bus down and stayed with John and went to his first classes. And so there it began in 1968, no, or years before that too, but 1970 I started to teach, so it was a lot of travelling in between. I'd go to Lismore because I follow him down there after Brisbane, because I had an aunt down there, so I'd have extra lessons there, and then I'd eventually bought a little car called Maudie, and Phil, a friend of mine, said, "Could you come with me?" And I said, "I'm sorry, Mona, I carry I had built up a wonderful collection of containers and flowers. There wasn't room for another person." So I went after I'd bought the car, I'd go to sometimes meet my Bundaberg people at halfway, and then we'd go through Nanango and over. But that went on it was a long time of many visits. I went, and then when I did qualify, I was asked by Townsville, if they flew, would I come up? I think twice a year first of all, and then increased. And Mavis Bear would put me up. Various people did in the future, but so I flew to Brisbane first of all, because that was the only way to get up, and then that was quite a business to go to this Maryborough and a nuisance, because they were very careless with my luggage. Rob and Mary were in Townsville, and the Townsville people knew about Ikebana and would like to learn, so they offered to fly me up 2 or 3 times a year. So I first of all started in Maryborough with 9 students, and then the next one, Bundaberg, because one of my girls, I'd taught Western art, and she said, "Oh, please come to Bundaberg." So Bundaberg I went, and then the next one was Townsville, and I went and I gave them 7 lessons each day, and then they. And then, there were 2 girls came from Cairns, so in effect I taught from Cairns right up to Buderim. And the next thing was, well, Harvey Bay came to Maryborough classes, and I had 500 louvers in a very big area at Primrose Hill, and so the Bundaberg girls and Maryborough girls were taught together first of all, and then separated. Separated when the Bundaberg girls got bigger. So then one of my Bundaberg girls went to Noosa, and she said, "Will you please come here if I give you, if I advertise for you, and if I give you accommodation?" So she did that, and so that was the next place, and we formed Ikebana International, which is a separate thing, and that only folded the other last month after being 40 years of you know, meeting every couple of months, which was wonderful. Bundaberg, Noosa, some girls, and Maryborough and Harvey Bay. Now I'm going to talk about my highest awards. Well, each one came and I was so thrilled about it. The 70th, the 70th was this one, when it's got a 7 and most unusual. And Mary thinks she's going to get another one, but I don't. That was 70. 80 is up there, and Mary and Renee and I went over to receive that and had it framed at my expense, of course. And my Japanese name is Ate, which is over there. E-I-T-E-I, and it means reflecting gardens. And there are at least 80 people who have graduated, and they have all got part of my name. So I'd say I can't go any higher. So it's just a matter of getting the 70th, the 80th, and Mary and Renee are going to collect the 90th.